Welcome to the station Unfiltered. I'm Michelle Wheelis.
And I'm Rachel Bowman. And we're so excited that you joined us for episode 5 of our podcast. And last time we discussed how to cultivate courage in our lives and how important that is, but also how difficult it can be. And as we thought about courage, we were thinking about the different areas of our life where we do need to go after being courageous. And one of those areas is confrontation in relationship. And so we thought we would dive a little into how do we do confrontation. Michelle and I want to share some of our personal experiences with learning how to confront issues in friendships and relationships with people. Because ultimately we know that we need to go after loving people because God calls us to love people as we love ourselves. His word says that in the Bible. And so how do we do that when relationships can be difficult at times? It's also important to protect relationship and to keep heart connection with people because relationships are worth fighting for. They are, whether it's in a workspace or in friendship or in dating or in marriage, relationships are worth fighting for. And learning how to love people well includes healthy confrontation. And we'll talk more in a little bit just about what that looks like. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to share about your experience with confrontation too, Michelle.
Well, I'd definitely say that I've grown a lot. I grew up in the era of like when kids started getting like cell phones in like middle school and high school. And so it was kind of like, it was still new, but definitely you start relying on it a lot more than like the people before us, I guess, because they didn't have cell phones. But I think texting used to be a huge way that I would confront people. And like I've grown now to the point where I respect people enough to actually have conversations in person or even like over the phone. But I do think, I've grown a lot in that because I did rely on texting a lot. I do think it was a cop-out for me because it felt safer. But yeah, having the courage to actually be like, hey, can we chat? Even though if I received that text message, I would immediately be like, oh my gosh, they're upset with me. What do they want to talk about? But definitely like having the courage to be like, hey, I'd love to speak with you in person. I do think it's a lot easier once you're in it. Like you get to hear the tone of someone's voice. They get to hear your tone, know that you're coming into this like, hey, this is how I've been feeling, and not just a text message that kind of shows up out of nowhere. Like I know I've received text messages and you're like sitting there like, I was with you like 10 minutes ago. Like, why didn't you just say this to me in person? Mm-hmm. It is very impersonal. Impersonal? Is that how you would say that?
Yeah, impersonal.
Impersonal. But like we do think it is easier. But I feel like that's just something that I've grown out of, and I'm very proud of myself for that. Yeah. I think that is something that I've grown in. I know I've also been able to, I don't know, I've been in situations where I've been hurt and I allow that to cause bitterness. And the bitterness almost makes me feel like I don't want to confront because I'm like, this person hurt me.
Right.
Like, why should I?
Right. Yeah.
But it is like that bitterness causes that disconnect. Mm-hmm. And that removes us from like the love aspect of like, if one of my best friends hurts me, mm-hmm. and then I allow that bitterness to come in and remove like my love for them, then I'm not going to go into a conversation in a very like loving way. Like I'm not going to go into a conversation being like, hey, I love you, but this hurt me. I'm going to go in and be like, you hurt me. And so it is something, that I've grown in of like having to, even before a conversation, pray about it and be like, God, remove this bitterness.
That's good. Yeah.
Help me, like remind me how much I love this person, because that is the reason I want to go in and work on restoring this issue.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what, we've learned is we need to deal with confrontation because it creates heart connection and restores relationship. Deal with issues with confrontation quickly. Don't let it fester, because otherwise bitterness and resentment and unforgiveness take root in our hearts and minds towards these people. And have courage to have the hard conversations with the people that you care about. And I know that it's hard sometimes because you may want to have heart connection, but maybe the other person doesn't. Mm-hmm. So how do we deal with that? Where does that lie in confrontation? Like, we're trying to have confrontation, the other person doesn't want to. So what do we do? What should we do?
If you're doing all the work for yourself, and you're putting in the work, and then you go into this conversation to try to restore, and they aren't reciprocating, then that's almost like, okay, you're not taking responsibility for hurting me, or you're not going to take, or you're not going to try and change your behavior. So now I have to put a boundary, because otherwise this is just going to continue hurting me. And so I think learning how to set healthy boundaries. Yeah. And they're going to be I think we talked about this and you said customized.
Yeah.
But it is
customized healthy boundaries.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that a little bit right now. We'll just get a little deep. Like, if you have someone in your life and you had abuse in your past, and now you have somebody in your life that is triggering how you felt when you were abused as a child, that needs to get confronted and communicated through. We can't ever assume that the other person knows that they're affecting us that way. And that's why healthy confrontation is so important, right? Mm-hmm. We definitely have to take ownership for our own stuff, but we can't assume that the other person understands how they make us feel. Yeah. And so part of healthy confrontation is sharing with the person, when you do this, it makes me feel this way. And hopefully the person, listens and engages and partners with you in working through this confrontation. Mm-hmm. And again, if they don't want to work on the relationship and they don't want to fight for heart connection, yes, that's when healthy boundaries come into play. And I want to speak to healthy boundaries a little bit too with this. Healthy boundaries are not walls. I heard Danny Silk. I never will take credit for anything that I hear that's so wise, because there's other wise people out there. And Danny Silk said something that I listened to recently. I think you sent it to me on Instagram. He said that when we put healthy boundaries in our life, they're actually meant to increase heart connection, because it's saying to the person, when this mess over here gets cleaned up, then the boundaries can get a little more loose, in our relationship. I definitely want to fight for this relationship. I want to fight for heart connection, but I need these healthy boundaries in place until the mess that was created in our relationship gets cleaned up, and everyone in the relationship takes ownership for their mess in the relationship. And that's where healthy boundaries are healthy. Healthy boundaries don't actually say, you cannot be in my life ever again. I don't think that's God's heart in relationship. I believe that God always wants us to fight for heart connection and loving others as we love ourselves. That's Jesus's second greatest commandment. First, to love him with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, but then to love others as we love ourselves. And so that's the purpose for healthy confrontation, healthy communication, and healthy boundaries in relationship. I do want to speak to one thing, though, because I know with healthy boundaries, there are times in our lives that people are very toxic in relationship. Again, it could be an abusive relationship, and it may not be healthy for you to be engaging in that relationship, because that person doesn't even know how to clean up their mess or want to. And it's abusive. And in that type of situation, I believe there's so much grace from God to step away from those relationships to stay safe. And so I wanted to speak to that too, because I think sometimes people are so afraid that they're not following God's commandment to love others as they love themselves, and they stay in very abusive, toxic relationships, and that's just not healthy. And I don't believe God wants them to stay in those types of relationships where they're, getting abused. It's not right. And so there's a lot to unpack with confrontation, and there's so many aspects of this, and it takes so much courage, doesn't it, Michelle? Like, where else, have you just noticed in your life, where you've just had to cultivate courage to have those confrontations? What other thoughts do you have about that?
I think for me, the hardest time I've ever had was when I was in a role of leadership.
Okay.
And
sure.
had people I was supervising, or I was their boss or whatever in that role.
Yeah.
Almost anytime it's happened, it's been someone who's a peer and not I guess I'm pretty young, so I don't know why I would be overseeing toddlers. I don't know. But I remember in college, I was the head cook for the cafeteria and was placed in that leadership role over one of my friends. And it's one of those things where it's even giving healthy feedback can seem scary because this person's my friend. And that's where it's okay, I don't know, needing to trust the relationship enough, or just trusting in your connection with that person, that they're going to take it well, even if it is kind of awkward at first. I will say there are times where I've tried to share criticism or share a need, and it hasn't been taken well. And it takes courage to come back from that, because
it does.
You're
exactly.
Oh, they just blew up on me.
Yeah.
And so it is hard, because I remember that happening and having to walk a process of hey, so that actually wasn't okay either. So having to the initial confrontation forced me into other confrontations with the person of needing them to take responsibility for what they did after. And it it's messy.
It is.
Needing to go in, we said earlier, with love and wanting that restoration.
Yeah. Yes.
I went to a prayer meeting last night, and somebody prayed that it would be really hard for us to be offended. And I think, I remember in high school, at some point, somebody saying that we should pray to be unoffendable, which is that's a very...
So hard.
Honestly, too scared to even pray it. because then it just, But I do think that, loving someone so much to the point where you won't, get offended.
Yeah.
And needing to love through offense.
Yeah.
Because I do love you, but you did hurt me. So how can I continue to love you well, if you keep doing that?
Right.
I don't know. I think it is important just to even express that I love and care for you. And I don't want that love, I won't ever let that level change.
Right.
But there are levels of love that I have a standard for myself.
Right.
And you're not meeting that.
Yes.
And that's a hard realization, but it is I've expressed this need, or I've expressed this trigger, and it's not your responsibility that I am experiencing it this way.
Right.
But if you'd like to continue this relationship, this is how I'm going to need you to interact with me or behave or like respect this need, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we've said that already, but I do think it is like just having that conversation and like letting it be a conversation and not just going in with like, this is how you made me feel. Like it's never anybody else's responsibility
Right.
to take care of your triggers
Right.
that they don't know about.
Yeah.
Like I made a note of like, people aren't walking around thinking, how can I trigger this person?
Right.
Like
They're not.
if they don't know, they don't know.
Yeah.
And that's why we need to have the healthy communication. And like, that's how relationships get stronger,
Yes.
because you can come back from this and love each other way better because you know what each other needs.
Yes. Yeah. Even when we have confrontation with people and we lay down that right to be offended, it doesn't mean that they'll lay down that right to be offended. But it's us that needs to take ownership for ourselves. We can't force anything on anyone. We can't force relationship with people. We can't control people. That's not our job. Our job is to love people as we love ourselves, like the Bible says. And I'll read this scripture out of John 15, verse 13. It says, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." And with that comes a laying down of offense along the way. With that comes being courageous to have healthy confrontation and fight for relationship, even though it's hard and difficult at times. And people, like Michelle said, are messy, and they're not always going to like us. We're not always going to be able to please people in relationship, and we have to be okay with that. It's hard, though, isn't it, Michelle? Pleasing people and wanting them to like you, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think there have been times where someone has hurt me, and for some reason I have a hard time going to them with it and discussing it because I don't want to make them upset that they hurt me. You know, like I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I don't want to like offend them, but your behavior made me feel this way. It's like not wanting to call someone out, but also like
Right.
wanting to share
Yeah.
my need. And like, I think for me, it became, or I'm still struggling with it, but almost I need to be okay with the current discomfort of a confrontation
Yeah.
to save myself the future discomfort of a continually like, I don't know how to word this. Like, if I don't share my need, it's just going to continue to not be met.
Yeah, that's right.
And so if I share my need now, even though it's uncomfortable, now it will be met, and it saves me all of that like discomfort in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's important, of like having the courage to be uncomfortable now,
Yeah.
to have this conversation now, so that you can save you and that other person potentially a big blowout in the future of like, you've now
That's
let this fester for this long.
Yes. Yeah.
And yeah, so being uncomfortable now to save yourself from the future discomfort.
Yeah. I love that so much. And the truth is, you know, in the Bible, Jesus had 12 disciples, but there was only 3 that actually were invited into his inner circle. And they, you know, Peter, James, and John, they got to go into the garden with him. They got to go up to the Mount of Transfiguration with him. They got to see him and listen to him pray and cry out to his Father in heaven. And the truth is that we definitely have to love every person. Every person. We should love everyone. But there's not going to always be every friend is the closest friend, right? There's levels of friendship. There's levels of relationship. And that's okay too, to have relationships where you love the person, but if they're not engaging in healthy confrontation, if they're not actually respecting healthy boundaries in your life and in this relationship, then they're probably not meant to be your closest friends. That's important too. in doing healthy relationship with people is recognizing who are the ones that are willing to actually engage in these healthy confrontations with you and fight through the hard stuff and lay down the right to be offended. If your friend is also laying down the right to be offended, then that's a friend that you want to keep and you want to draw near to you. And those that are consistently offended, again, you keep loving them and you do keep trying and fighting for a relationship, but they have to want to fight for it too. Those people aren't necessarily going to be your closest friends, right? And so I think one of the ways to connect hope to healthy confrontation is that there's always hope for reconciliation. And I do believe it starts with being brave and courageous to ask somebody and invite someone into a healthy conversation. And if we can actually push through the fear of doing that, it can lead to beautiful reconciliation in relationships. And I just want to leave all of you with hope today that you may be thinking of someone right now as we've been talking about relationship and confrontation and healthy boundaries. You may be thinking of one person, a variety of people. And I just want to encourage you today to not lose hope in the reconciliation that can happen in that relationship or even multiple relationships in your life. I believe there's always hope when we are willing to lay down our right to be offended and have those healthy conversations and be courageous. So I encourage you, go be courageous today. Send someone a message and say, hey, can we meet up? Let's go to coffee and have the conversation.
Don't text them your confrontation.
Oh, yeah. But yes, don't text them the confrontation. We already covered that. But just invite them. You can invite them through text. Yeah. That's okay, right? Yeah, that's okay. So thank you. Thanks so much for listening today. And do you want to share how they can follow us and all those things?
Follow us on Instagram at The Station Corp. You can email us at info@thestationcorp.com, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel at The Station Corp. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much. See you next time.